Archimandrite Anempodist, or Afanasy Alexeyevich Alekseev, was born on the 5th of July 1869 in the village of Kolanitsa of Mikhailov township of Porkhov County of Pskov province to a peasant family. At a young age, Afanasy Alekseev was accepted as an obedient to the monastery of Holy Spirit in the town of Vilnius, then taking monastic vows with name Anempodist, and approximately in 1910 being ordained an abbot. By 1915, Abbot Anempodist Alekseev was ordained an archimandrite and became the vicar of the community of monks. When the First World War started, Tikhon, Archbishop of Vilnius and Lithuania, ordered to evacuate the institutions of Grodno and Vilnius diocese, placing them in Donskoy monastery along with evacuated clergymen and laics. This way, in 1915, Archimandrite Anempodist, with the relics of Vilnius saints, had to leave Vilnius for Moscow, being accepted to Donskoy monastery, where he served for the next 2 years. The revolution happened. After coming to force in October 1917, the Bolsheviks began their struggle against the Russian Orthodox Church. On the 23rd of January 1918, the decree of the separation of the Church from the state and the school from the Church was issued. Religious organizations, including Orthodox monasteries, were deprived of the status of a juristic party. Their property became the property of the state. At the churches, religious communities named the 20s were created, and the property was given to them on temporal basis. The brethren of former Donskoy monastery served at Donskaya community that was created by the parishioners who shared with them their struggle for saving monastery churches and the right for serving there. After the revolution, the monastery and its inhabitants had to pass all that the Russian Orthodox Church passed at that time: the desecration of relics, the confiscation of church property, the closure of churches, and persecution of the clergymen. Monastery table those years was rather poor. The brethren starved and faced diseases. Trying to find some food, monks went to their relatives in the villages, while others left the monastery. Many monks worked in the museum that was arranged in the monastery. Others worked as grave diggers or watchmen. In order to have something to eat, Archimandrite Anempodist Alekseev had to sell his property. The brethren did all their best to help him. From 1917 to 1921, Archimandrite Anempodist Alekseev was the vicar of the male monastery of the Theotokos of Tolga in Yaroslavl province. On the 3rd of September 1921, Father Anempodist was returned to Moscow by Patriarch Tikhon to fill the position of a superior of the monastery of the Sign. But as the position was temporarily occupied, Father Anempodist became the assistant of the Patriarch at St. Trinity Sigils Lavra Town Church. Archimandrite Anempodist became a close confidant of St. Tikhon, serving both as secretary and assistant. Until the 5th of May 1922, he was an economist of the Trinity Town Church of the Patriarch. When the assistant of Patriarch Tikhon, Jacob Polozov, was behind bars, Archimandrite Anempodist did his job, reported about visitors, and cleaned the rooms. Their contemporaries recollected the following: "The citizens of Moscow will always remember Archimandrite Anempodist sitting near Patriarch Tikhon in a cab, proving an escort for him during trips and taking part in Patriarch's liturgies. Everyone who was in the waiting room of the Patriarch clearly remember huge, fat, and white Patriarch's economist Archimandrite Anempodist and his prompt stride. This fat monk looked so earthly that he seemed not to be a hero of spirit, full of moral power. However, the Patriarch knew his economist well. He was a pure man with little education." On the 23rd of February, All Russian Central Executive Committee made a decree about confiscation of church property to help the starving. Churches all over the country were literally plundered. From the 3rd to the 5th of April 1922, from Donskoy Monastery, almost 220 kilos of silver and more than 2 kilos of gold were confiscated. For serving at churches, only simple liturgical vessels, gospels, and all sacred vestments were left. During the confiscation of church property from St. Trinity Town Church, Archimandrite Anempodist Alekseev protested against it, putting on all the sacred vestments, declaring his protest to the commission, and then taking it off, and leaving the church. Soon after that, on the 5th of May, archimandrite Anempodist Alekseev was arrested, being accused in participation in anti-Soviet activity of Patriarch Tikhon, being one of the 54 Moscow clergymen and laicks who were arrested according to the case of St. Trinity Town Church. The Patriarch worried about his assistant and did all his best to help, but could not help joking. They have confiscated one more church property, Anempodist. From the 5th to the 11th of May, Father Anempodist was in a holding cell of the OGPU, later being imprisoned in Lubyanka. When messages about his behavior reached the Patriarch, he smiled and said, "My Anempodist will not surrender. I trust him." 2 weeks later, according to the private petition of the Patriarch, his assistant was released on his own custody, and on the 23rd of May came to Donskoy Monastery, where Patriarch Tikhon was in forced chamber arrest. Only 7 months later, on the 22nd of December 1922, the OGPU meeting decided to close the case due to lack of a body of a crime and cancel the recognizance not to live. On the 6th of April 1923, on Great Saturday, newspaper Izvestia published the following message. On the 11th of May, the Superior Court opens the case of former Patriarch Tikhon and his henchmen. The same day, Father Anempodist was arrested along with the Superior of the Donskoy Monastery, Archimandrite Alekseev. At first, Father Anempodist was in a holding cell of the OGPU, later being imprisoned in Butyrka. Soon, the Patriarch was also arrested. Being asked about the attitude towards Patriarch Tikhon and the Synod, Father Anempodist answered, "I treat Patriarch Tikhon as the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. I treat him like father, obeying him and doing his errands connected to the Church." Upon his release, Archimandrite Anempodist again settled in Donskoy Monastery. When Patriarch was also released, he was met there in the reception room by his assistant Jacob Anisimowicz with his wife and fat and merry Archimandrite Anempodist. Before the arrest of the Patriarch, they were his closest. The Patriarch always joked with them and was very attached to them. A letter of Archimandrite Anempodist to Patriarch Tikhon was saved. Pathetically, it said about the further events and those spiritual struggles that observed our country. "My heart is bleeding. I feel that you face or will face sorrow in this hard time, as if heavy clouds clung to Russia. Early patriarchs were protected by tsars and godliness of people, while now we can hardly find any Nicodim to help bear the cross that you are given by God. Daily I pray in tears in front of the wonder-working icon of Our Lady, asking her to be your guidance on your road to Calvary. Now you are the head of our church, and behind your back there always be both good and evil people, both friends and enemies. You will be the target for evil mad minds. Now it is extremely hard to catch up with such a rapid life. Nevertheless, for the sake of the Holy Church, it is needed to have extreme caution to lead the ship of St. George through all the pitfalls towards the great acts of mercy. I kindly ask your blessing and prayers, treating you like my spiritual father, always your meek and sinful obedient of simple origin, Archimandrite Anempodist." In 1924, the Royal Dean of Moscow Monasteries, Archimandrite Anempodist, was included in Supreme Church Committee, but the clouds were gathering. On the 9th of December 1924, during robbery attack on the Patriarch's house at Donskoy Monastery, his assistant Jacob Polozov was killed, while on the 20th of January 1925, Archimandrite Anempodist Alekseev was arrested by the OGPU. On the 7th of April, Patriarch Tikhon passed away, and the persecution of clergymen became more severe. 2.5 months later, on the 19th of June 1925, Father Anempodist was sentenced by the special meeting of the OGPU to 3 years of exile that he served in the town of gleaned in the Central Asia. In spring 1928, the clergyman returned to Moscow. According to the materials of the archive investigation case of Abbess Tamara Likhareva, opened by the OGPU in 1931, from Moscow she took archimandrite Anempodist, who had previously been exiled, and sometime later Anempodist left the town of Ruza. Being unwanted for the authorities as a living reminder and a companion of Patriarch Tikhon, and also being a very notable person, archimandrite Anempodist was soon exiled from Moscow to the town of Astrakhan of Nizhny-Volsky region, where he lived the rest of his life in a private flat, in obscurity, almost as a hermit. Shortly before his death, the clergyman took great schema vows with name Antony. Schema archimandrite Antony Alekseev passed away in 1935 at the age of 66, being buried at local Pentecost graveyard near the church.